Welcome, everyone, to the March Bio Coffee Chat, which was really inspired by Rare Disease Week and Rare Disease Day at the end of February, and by really the increasing needs for incentives for drug development for rare diseases, as we will talk about, for antimicrobial resistance. We have an amazing panel today. We will start with some moderated discussion, but I do want to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience. So as you have questions, please, please, please bring them at the end. And I will just very briefly introduce every panelist as we kind of start talking. In the interest of time, in the chat, we will have their extended bios. They're so impressive that if I read through all of them, we would spend a large part of the conversation just on that. So please find them in the chat. And just a reminder too, last month we talked about patient engagement in the CMS listening sessions, and we'll put the link to the little write-up and the recording in the chat. It's really timely. The deadline to sign up for patient groups to engage in the CMS listening sessions is this week on March 12th. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to me, look back at the recording and the write-up from last week, reach out to any of the amazing panelists we had last week. We really need the patient perspective front and center in the CMS listening sessions. With that, I would love to start off the conversation today with Jamie. Really briefly, would you introduce yourself, what the Every Life Foundation does, and talk a little bit about rare diseases just to orient ourselves?
Well, sure. First of all, thanks, Karen, for having us and for convening this conversation. Coming off a couple really busy weeks in DC, and also during a week in which there are yet more organizations, rare disease organizations on the Hill having fly-ins and speaking up for rare disease priorities. So for those I don't know, I'm Jamie Sullivan. I'm Vice President of Policy at the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases. We are a patient advocacy organization that really focuses on policy and advocacy for many of the common challenges that face the rare disease community. And I think probably most people are aware already, but Karen asked me to level set a little bit. So just in case, rare diseases by statute are those impacting less than 200,000 Americans. However, the vast majority of rare diseases are affecting far fewer, far less than 200,000. And there are at least 10,000, likely more than 10,000 identified rare diseases and growing every day. And one of the biggest challenges we work to solve is the fact that 95% of rare diseases have no FDA approved treatment. So in Every Life, our focus areas are on what those common challenges across rare diseases are. So shortening the diagnostic odyssey right now that runs around, an average of more than 6 years from symptom to receiving an accurate diagnosis. So how can we make that diagnosis more timely? The creating the incentives and the regulatory infrastructure that will enable rare disease therapy development because no disease is too rare to deserve treatment. And then that access and value space where we know that just having a treatment isn't enough. We need to work on policy issues that are going to make sure care and innovation are accessible once they are available. So it's a little bit about Every Life. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. And handing it over to Tori, would you briefly introduce yourself and talk about NORD and what NORD does in this space? And a
Yeah,
little
thanks
bit
so much.
maybe about the Orphan Drug Act and like the history of where we got to where we are.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen, and thanks again for inviting me to speak today. So my name is Tori Gem, and I'm the new Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the National Organization for Rare Disorders. Really thrilled to have joined such a wonderful organization and team, and big shoes to fill, as Karen previously helped us roll. So Just a refresher for those who are not as familiar with NORD, we represent more than 30 million Americans living with rare diseases, and we were founded more than 40 years ago after the passage of the Orphan Drug Act, really to formalize that coalition of patient advocacy groups that were instrumental in passing the landmark law. And I know you all are very familiar likely with the Orphan Drug Act, but just as a reminder, it was enacted in 1983 and really became the first landmark law in the world to incentivize biopharmaceutical companies to invest in the development of drugs and biologics or orphan products for the more than now 10,000 rare diseases. For the incentives that were included in the ODA that are really vital, there were tax credits for qualified clinical testing expenses incurred in clinical trials, federal research grants for clinical study of new tests and therapies to diagnose and treat rare diseases, exemption from FDA marketing application fees, and 7 years of market exclusivity. And those incentives have really had an enormous impact on the availability of safe and effective treatments for rare disease community. Before 1983, there were fewer than 40 FDA-approved treatments for rare diseases, really leaving millions of patients in the US and the rest of the world without safe and effective therapies for their conditions. Today, there are well over 600 FDA-approved treatments for rare diseases, but a lot more work needs to be done. Over 95% of rare diseases are still without an FDA-approved treatment. So really, since the passage of the ODA, NORD has sort of been working tirelessly to advance rare disease research and funding to support the development of effective treatments and cures, raising awareness and addressing key knowledge gaps, and advocating for policies that support the availability of and access to safe and effective therapies. I'm so happy to share more later, answer any questions. Looking forward to the chat as well. So I'll hand it back to you, Karen.
Fantastic. And Bridget, I think we've both Jamie and Tori have alluded to some of the challenges associated with rare disease drug development. And I know you, in your role, work every day to help bring new treatments to your community. Can you talk a little bit about who you are, your organization, and kind of some of the challenges that patients with NF are facing?
Of course. Again, to reiterate what Victoria and Jamie said, I want to thank the committee for asking me to be a part of this discussion today. My name is Bridget Gerlich, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Children's Tumor Foundation. Children's Tumor Foundation was founded approximately 45 years ago and has continued to grow and evolve over that time from a grassroots advocacy organization to now what I would describe as more of a research advocacy research foundation. We focus on a genetic disorder called neurofibromatosis. It encompasses neurofibromatosis type 1 and then the schwannomatoses, NF2 related schwannomatosis, and those that are referred to as non-NF2 related schwannomatosis. NF and schwannomatosis are genetic conditions that are diagnosed or can be diagnosed throughout a lifetime or at birth. And patients are born with them either through family inheritance, or there are up to 50% that are sporadic at birth. It is for NF1, it's a genetic condition that can affect over 4 million people worldwide. And it can be very challenging and is a very heterogeneous disease. Patients are impacted and can develop visible cutaneous tumors called neurofibromas throughout their life. They also have plexiform neurofibromas that can form throughout their body, and then also optic pathway gliomas that can lead to blindness. They often deal with pain, mobility issues, and sensory challenges. That also requires a lifetime of healthcare. Schwannomatosis, also a rare genetic condition, is more rare than NF1, and patients are afflicted with very painful schwannomas that grow on the nerves throughout their body. They can also be affected by meningiomas and ependymomas, two malignant brain tumors, although more rare, and can, as part of the schwannomas, develop what's called vestibular schwannomas, which can impact and cause deafness in patients. The CTF provides a number of resources and support to the patient community. And it's basically provides support, which I like to describe, and education and engagement to multiple stakeholders. So we continue to provide support to patients and families on a regular basis, and then also focus very much so on the education of the healthcare community, continue to educate patients and families, and then also non-NF healthcare community to raise awareness and engage those not currently in the space. And this has continued to evolve, that now we also focus more so on educating industry partners and stakeholders, as well as regulatory partners. We also, over the years, have developed a very strong, what we call clinic network, and provide support to the clinics throughout rare disease. I'm sure all of you are aware that having a strong clinical network, particularly in a rare disease space, is important, so that physicians can rely on one another to learn best practices and evidence-based treatment. And we provide support and grant funding to a lot of those programs. Jamie, you discussed the Diagnostic Odyssey. We've supported looking at diagnosis and the definition of diagnosis in both NF1 and schwannomatosis. And recently they were updated over the last several years. Also now we're funding and supporting a guidelines, trying to provide evidence-based research to physicians in the space. More recently too, we're embarking on providing what I'd like to call the tools to de-risk development for patients and families through what we describe as a preclinical hub, where we are focused on translational medicine and providing access and also guidance to those industry partners on the correct models and path for translational preclinical path for their asset, should they be pursuing in the NF space. And this both increases efficiency and de-risks for them. And we're also focused on innovative adaptive trial design throughout partnering with different organizations and helping to fund this research to encourage and also make more efficient drug discovery for our patients with neurofibromatosis. I'm sure on that note I've gone over, and I'll hand it back to you, Karen.
Oh, thank you so much for all the amazing work that you all are doing to help develop treatments and cures for these diseases that really have a tremendous impact on the patient community. And Ron, I know you're no stranger to the challenges of trying to develop a drug for rare diseases, working with FDA and NIH to bring treatments to market, but then also working with the payer community to ensure that there's access. Would you mind briefly talking about yourself and Farah, and in a nutshell, what you all are doing to support rare disease drug development and some of the challenges you see?
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for having us all together today. I'll try to be putting it all in a very small nutshell. It's very difficult to do. But I'll say, yeah, my name is Ron Bartek. I'm the co-founder with my wife, Rachel, and always been the president of the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, or FARA. Quick note about FA, as I will call it. It's a rare recessive trait genetic disorder, neurodegenerative in form. It causes substantial loss of vision, hearing, speech, severe scoliosis or curvature of the spine, requiring surgical implantation of metal rods to get your spine straight and keep it there. You lose strength and coordination in all four extremities, so you're usually in a wheelchair by your mid-teens. And you have a much increased risk of diabetes. Most condemning symptom is cardiomyopathy, severe heart condition that is the biggest cause of death in early adulthood in our patients. So our son Keith was diagnosed with FA at age 11 in 1997. We looked around on our old Gateway computer and saw that there was no treatment, no trials going on, very little research being conducted, no organization devoted to supporting that research entirely. My wife and I decided, here we were living 30 minutes from the NIH and 45 from the FDA. Maybe we could form an organization that might change some of those zeros to crooked numbers. We established the organization in 1998, the year after our son was diagnosed. And we decided we needed to grow the field. And so we set about doing that. And I can illustrate that growth by saying that the first international scientific conference in our disease we conducted in 1999, and we gathered 65 scientists from around the world. No drug companies. They all said, you're too rare, you're on your own. We had one other patient advocacy organization, and we had 2.5 days at the NIH. Fast forward to last November, we held the 9th International Scientific Conference. There were 650 participants, 4 dozen pharmaceutical partners that were conducting programs in our disease, and 17 other patient advocacy groups that were collaborating with us, co-funding grants. And so that shows the growth. And during that growth period, we've been able to be the primary funder of the basic science characterizing our disease. We've provided, as Bridget talked about, translational tools, the cell and animal models, to our industry partners, a very important natural history database that we've crafted over 21 years now, and a clinical network that's followed all that development together. And the final 2 things about the growth I will talk about is the relationships that we've formed and nurtured and cultivated with the NIH, with the FDA, with a global community of families and scientists, pharmaceutical partners, other advocacy organizations like NORD and EveryLife and Bio, and it's all led to the culture that we're so proud of, that we're all in, all together, all the time. And with all those assets, I like to call them the assets the industry partners need to succeed. We achieved our first FDA-approved treatment on Rare Disease Day 2 years ago, 2023. We now have a second application before the FDA reviewers. We have several gene therapy trials underway, one protein replacement trial underway. So we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but we're confident in our path. We'll get there together. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. And it's just so amazing to see what is possible when people work together and when the science comes together. Tom, you are representing the sepsis community, and one thing that strikes me, having come from the AMR community a while ago, just how similar the challenges are between rare diseases and antimicrobial resistance drug development. Would you mind briefly talking about sepsis, which I know is one of these really big risks in the background for many rare diseases, and a little bit about why you're here and the challenges related to developing new antibiotics?
Great. Yeah, and thanks, Karen. Thanks for holding this and for inviting me. And some may be wondering why Sepsis Alliance is here. After all, where sepsis is very, very common. And ostensibly, we have treatments. Although, as you say, with antimicrobial resistance, those treatments are disappearing, and we're seeing more and more folks need a second or third or fourth, even different treatment to successfully treat infections. There's also a tremendous amount of heterogeneity to sepsis that we're finding, that we may be down a path more like cancer than to a specific disease. And for that reason, we're moving as fast as we can toward creating an infrastructure for a national sepsis registry, like the cancer registry. It's been so helpful in understanding the heterogeneity that exists within cancer. And we may not be 430 types, but we may be 100 types. And I think, the lack of that knowledge, that access to the patient data, is really holding us back from really being able to refine the research, refine the diagnostic process, refine the therapies, so that we can actually do a better job at treating folks who have sepsis, so we can reduce the mortality, which is very, very high. So I think, in fact, our Venn diagram is very, very compatible. And in fact, many people think sepsis is rare. And I still see articles that someone was hurt by something very rare called septic shock. So, and in fact, when Carl Flatley, who had the misfortune of starting this organization due to having lost a daughter to something he'd never heard of before, 23-year-old daughter, perfectly healthy, as far as we know. At that point in time, 2002, only 19% of the country had heard the word before, and half or more couldn't tell you what it was. And amazingly, Microsoft did not even have the word in its dictionary. So sepsis was a spell check error 20 years ago. So we've come a long way. And, as I think everyone probably knows on this call, sepsis is not an infection, not a type of infection, but it's our body's response to an infection that can damage our vital organs and very often causes death. We often use a metaphor, which is like it's like a bee sting. When you get stung by a bee, it hurts, but it's usually not a problem unless your body has that anaphylactic reaction to the bee sting, and then bad things can happen. Similarly, with sepsis, any type of infection, bacterial, viral, parasitic, or fungal, can set off that cascade to sepsis, which is common, deadly, and expensive. 1.7 million cases each year in the US, and we believe that's an undercount. It's going up with COVID and other new pandemics coming across. Mortality rate extremely high, 350,000 deaths each year in the US, 11 million globally, 7,000 children in the US, more than cancer, and responsible for over 1 in 3 hospital deaths. So more than 1 in 3 people who die in hospital are dying related to sepsis. So not surprisingly, it's the #1 cost of hospital care in the country. Readmissions are a problem. 40% of survivors are back in the hospital within 90 days. So it's not really being settled or resolved. And there's actually kind of an ongoing chronic component to sepsis, with more than half of survivors have ongoing challenges. We just did a survey, showed that as many as half are not back to work within 6 months. So there's a huge workplace productivity issues. There's a huge mortality risk, lots of morbidity issues, including 14,000 amputations each year. So, very often mislabeled as complications of something else. It's getting better. But, you hear complications of pneumonia or flu or UTI or even cancer sometimes. And very often sepsis is that cause of death. And very importantly, the risk factors are if you have an immune compromising condition, or if you're taking immunosuppressing drugs for your illness. These may increase your risk of developing an infection and having a weaker than what would be hoped for immune response to fight that infection. So it's a combination of the infection plus your body's response to that infection that can lead to that cascade or stop the cascade of sepsis. So very happy to be part of this conversation, be part of this community. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think one of the common themes that we've heard is the lack of data and the challenges of trying to develop effective therapies, whether it's in sepsis, whether it's in the different rare diseases. David, you're an economist, and you have done a lot of amazing work, but one of the things that I'm probably most thankful for is coming up with the idea of priority vouchers, and in particular the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher Program, which is one of these incentive programs to really help make it more feasible to develop therapies where The economics otherwise wouldn't pan out. Would you mind briefly introducing yourself and explain a little bit about what the program is, why it works, and how you came up with it?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, in about 3 minutes, I'll tell you about the history, how it works, and about the importance of renewal. So, first of all, the history. Jeff Henry and I published this paper in Health Affairs about 20 years ago, and we worked with Senators Brownback, a conservative, and Sherrod Brown, a progressive, to make it law. Senator Lieberman was involved. Years later, Senator Casey was very important. These are all members of the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee working across the aisle. So conservatives working with progressives to try to help people. And also, I should mention that so a bunch of academics came up with this idea and didn't do a great job with really execution and awareness. And bio actually played an important role in getting the word out about vouchers. How it works. I think many of you have heard of it, but just a quick reminder, because people do get confused. People regularly get confused, thinking, there's one drug involved. There's 2 drugs for every voucher. So one drug wins the voucher and the other drug uses the voucher. Both of these drugs get priority review. This one gets priority review because it's really important. This one gets priority review because it's got a voucher. Turns out this is also really important in the commercial market. But this one is a drug with limited commercial potential because it's for, say, an ultra rare disease for kids, or because there's in general, there's not a lot of rich people who have this disease. And that's true for rare pediatric diseases. It's also true for tropical diseases, which are also eligible for vouchers. Those are sometimes common diseases, but not many rich people have that disease. This is a drug that the commercial market values. So vouchers have been used for diabetes, HIV, cholesterol, diseases like that, where you can make a lot of money. Also do a lot of good. Getting this drug to market also helps people. But the main incentive is trying to create an opportunity to get resources for these drugs to move them forward. So just a little example of this. So in December of 2016, Congress reauthorized rare pediatric disease vouchers. So back in 2016, Congress did a reauthorization. It's what they didn't do in this most recent December, but they did it back in December of 2016, right before the holidays, as they often do. And a couple of weeks later, my Duke colleague got funding for her rare pediatric disease. So she was working on a biologic for DeGeorge syndrome, babies without T cells. So this was a biologic to save the lives of these babies. She got funding after it got renewed. And but she had to wait till that point. She'd been in conversations with investors before that, but they weren't willing to give her the resources to move her biologic forward unless they were confident that there would be some return. Without the priority review voucher program, there'd be no return. This is an ultra rare disease. There's no way this can be profitable. So there's no way to get sufficient funds to run the clinical trials, to get through the FDA process. So that's just a message for today that there are researchers waiting for resources that aren't getting them right now because the rare pediatric voucher program has not yet been renewed. So even though there's a window of a couple of years while vouchers are still being rewarded, so it might seem like there's really no harm in waiting, but there is harm because it's creating uncertainty, and it means that people aren't getting resources, and then it means that children are going to have to wait longer to get these important medicines. Karin also mentioned that I'm an economist, do some other work. I'm also doing some work on accelerated approvals where we have a modeling paper. It's still just a working paper, nothing published yet, but if time permits at the end today, I'll talk a little about that.
Absolutely. And thank you for all your amazing work that you're doing. Ron, looking at you, I know how important the pediatric priority review voucher has been for your community. Can you talk a little bit more about why it was important and kind of some of the challenges that your community was facing trying to develop that first drug and now developing all the other drugs related to FA to help hopefully eventually cure this disease. You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, great question. And I'd like to thank David for his fundamental work on getting these vouchers in place. We all know that there's been some pushback over the years about the vouchers and other rare orphan product incentives, thinking that maybe we've gone too far and over incentivized. Well, baloney, we haven't. And I can give you one real life story of how the vouchers themselves made a key difference for our population. And that was, you go back about 8 years, and we had flown down to Dallas to visit a company there called Reata that was exploring a pathological pathway in mitochondrial function that we thought would be of interest to our disease. We convinced them to get started with our disease. We helped them design their phase 1 clinical trial and flew down to Dallas to get the results. We saw the results, and we all said, best we've ever seen. The first trial we've seen meet the endpoints, the primary endpoints. So let's help you design a pivotal study. First thing the CEO said was, we'll do the pivotal study in adults. And I slammed my fist on the table and said, no, you should not do that. You should include children in your pivotal study. They said, no, the FDA would not buy that. And so we're going to begin with 18-year-olds. Hammered and hammered, they refused. I then told them about the rare pediatric disease priority review vouchers and how it could mean a couple $100 million to them, a very small company, a biotech. That convinced them, after about a half-hour discussion, to go down to 16 rather than 18, and to prepare the protocol to convince the FDA that this drug was being developed to include pediatric subjects. And so the pivotal study goes on for 3 years, and the open label extension demonstrates its efficacy and safety. They get their approval and the priority review voucher that then they sell along with the whole asset to a large company called Biogen. And now Biogen has begun the pediatric study. And guess who did the best in the pivotal study? It was the 16 and 17-year-olds did better. What a shock, right? You treat early, you get better results. So the PRVs were essential in getting that study down to 16, and now to start the pediatric study that we hope to go down to 2. So
to clarify, that is really important for access in order to convince the insurance companies to cover access. And I know you all had a big fight with the insurance community on this, but just wanting to clarify what it means to actually have pediatric indications on the label.
absolutely, and that's making a big difference already. We're having to go. This is a first world problem to have. We didn't have this problem until we got our first approval, right? But now we have to go state to state, dealing with Medicaid committees and company to company, dealing with access problems. And it's important that we're able to tell them that our pediatric subjects are included. And it's also important to be able to go with our industry partner and try to convince them, each of these Medicaid committees, to cover this product. It's the only disease treatment we have, and how to convince these insurance companies that they should cover this product, and how to measure success and failure. So it's really a difficult problem. We're having mixed results. Some Medicaid committees are saying no, some are saying yes, but we'll do it for 6 months and then we'll see if there's improvement. Well, and then some are saying yes. And so we hope to get better and better at this and get more and more access, not only inside the US, but outside the US. We've got approvals now in Europe. We're after approvals elsewhere. So it's a long drawn out process, but we're doing everything we possibly can.
Thank you. And Bridget, I see your hand up, and I was just about to ask you.
Yeah.
The pediatric priority review voucher has meant so much to your community. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and what makes pediatric research so difficult and why are these incentives so important?
Yeah, I just wanted to tag on to what Ron was discussing and add, in addition to that, the precedent that he set in so many ways with both the PRV and having been in industry in the past, the education of the feasibility and the importance of including younger patients in these first trials versus starting trials from scratch after a drug it reaches the market. But I'm sorry, Karen, I'll go to the question you asked me about how pediatric development is so challenging. First of all, rare disease in general and with pediatrics is challenging in the sense of running the traditional trial design. And development takes a long time. Classically, full development can be over 15 years and can be even longer in a rare and then a rare pediatric indication. So it's really important in addition to other aspects when you're convincing, as Ron's group did, the industry partners, the value to this that the PRV voucher can bring. This, particularly in the smaller industry partners who do not have the capital, it is important for them to realize that getting this voucher, then they can sell and get more capital for the R&D investment they made. And offset and then also the larger pharma, even showing them that this incentive can offset the cost of R&D and the lower market value that their traditional financial models are indicating they would get in doing full development in pediatric and rare disease. There's also the endpoints, and they are not always established and can be even more challenging for industry partners to understand as they embark on their traditional trial designs, and always feeling better if they have established endpoints with precedent. So one thing that I've learned over the years is having everybody at the table early on in development is key, and bringing the foundations which know the disease and the healthcare providers with the industry partners, as Ron's group did, to both educate and make people aware that may not be aware of the values in the development of these rare diseases, and that even without an endpoint that's established, you can build in surrogate endpoints that then can be used later on if you are able to show that it's as effective as the traditional endpoint. I hope I answered your question. There's a lot more, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
No, absolutely. And maybe we can go deeper a little bit later. But Tori, I know Nord has done some research looking at all the different communities that have been impacted by the pediatric priority review voucher and how much of an impact that program really had. So I was wondering if you have anything to add to the conversation so far.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. And I mean, the power of Ron's story and Bridget's story, in terms of what these mean is so critically important to the conversation. The work Nord did was just trying to add really a quantitative lens to, what has the PRV program sort of done to be additive to the ecosystem of incentives available to orphan drug products. So Nord conducted and published last summer a report assessing the impact of the PRV program on rare disease drug development. And that research really found that the PRV program has proven to be an effective sort of approach to stimulating drug development that helps to address this tremendous unmet medical need for pediatric rare disease communities. So the time of publication, just keep in mind, this last summer, I know some of these numbers have been updated. More than 560 rare disease designations had been made, and 53 rare pediatric disease priority review vouchers have been awarded at that time, showing the positive impacts that this program really has in driving commitments to study and also sort of complete development of those essential treatments. So at the time of the report, 39 rare diseases had gained treatment options. And remarkably, we found that 36 of these 39 rare diseases had no FDA-approved treatments prior to the creation of the program. The program's impact really has dramatically increased over time as well. More than half of all of the rare pediatric disease priority review voucher designations, awards, and redemptions, as measured at the time of the report, occurred in the last 4 years. And then I do believe that the number of awarded PRVs is now up to 60, but I know Jamie will keep me honest on that. And then sort of just one other thing I wanted to mention here is that there are a number of sort of misconceptions. I know there was a comment in the chat about the CBO score, but just another thing that I kind of want to flag here is related to sort of the use of these programs and extending monopolies on high spend drugs, that sort of concern. We actually found in our study that vouchers are not being redeemed to really extend those monopolies for those high cost drugs. Only 3 drugs ranked among the top 50 by the Medicare drug spend in 2022 received an FDA priority review due to this particular program. And then just another note that only 23 of the 53 RPD rare disease pediatric priority review vouchers awarded have been redeemed so far. So it's also not quite amassing to the level of burden that might have been concerned about with FDA sort of review staff time and resources. So happy to drop a link to the report in the chat so folks can sort of refer to it later as well. And I'll sort of leave it at that, but happy to share more if folks are interested.
Fantastic. And as Tori just said, this is a quickly moving field, which is exciting because we have a strong pipeline thanks to all the incentives that have been in place for so many years. We have a number of products that have been approved since that study was finished. And so it's an evolving field. And Jamie, I know you're living this every day. I was wondering if you can give us a brief update. As David said, unfortunately, the program has not been reauthorized in the last reauthorization. Can you talk to us a little bit about where the program currently stands, as well as some of the work that you all have done at the EveryLife Foundation to really tell the story of what the program means to so many patients and so many families?
Sure. Well, before I hop into the current status, I just want to say the importance of the data that Tori was talking about in the NORD report was even more important because of the fact that what we often hear cited is a GAO study that was done based on 2019 data. And as with any incentive for therapy development, it takes time to work. It takes time to influence decisions that are often made 10 years, before you would see a drug approval. And so the importance of keeping this data up to date and, continuing to tell the story that evolves every year is, can't be overstated because I think people seized on that 2019 GAO study to say, look, the program's not really having the intended effect, but it was way too early to say that and make that claim as is obvious when you start digging into some of the data now and what NORD had put out. So just wanted to add on to that. So where are we at now? Unfortunately, we're not listening to the data. We have a system that, we have a expired programs. So the authorization to award vouchers or grant designations technically expired on December 20th. So if no other action is taken, What that means is that for a therapy to be eligible to receive a priority review voucher when it's approved, it would have had to obtain their pediatric designation by December 20th, and it will have to receive approval by September 30th, 2026. So there's a approximately 2-year window in between those two dates. And that is because of the way the program was originally authorized or reauthorized in 2020. We got so close. And I think we are where we are now because of the political process, not the policy itself. And so last year, the House passed unanimously a bill called Give Kids a Chance Act, which packaged up a number of pediatric rare disease therapies, as well as the RARE Act and a couple other issues. And it included a 5-year reauthorization of the PRV program that passed unanimously in the House. Unfortunately, in the Senate, they didn't get to put that package through regular order through a hearing in the Health Committee. But there was clearly bipartisan support still, and it was present in the bipartisan healthcare policy package that was set originally to be passed along with the end of year funding legislation on December 20th. Unfortunately, the process in the environment being what it is, all of those policies were dropped in the end, except for a few critical healthcare extenders like telehealth. Then that meant that our authorization expired, and we have to start over because it's a new Congress. We also lost 2 of the core champions that were mentioned earlier, Senators Casey and Brown. And unfortunately, that means finding new Democratic Senate champions. So where are we at now? The House has reintroduced that Give Kids a Chance package that they already had put through hearings and negotiated as a full standalone bill. And the Senate is still working out their strategy. It's sort of an all hands on deck, all options that we can pursue, we are. So that means introducing the Creating Hope Reauthorization Act as a standalone bill. That is the original name of the bill that authorized the PRV program. And that hopefully will get introduced just as soon as a new Democratic champion, original co-lead is secured, hopefully this week. And the Senate continues to work on negotiating their version of that package, that combined Give Kids a Chance Act as well. And so we hope to see that moving forward because really any opportunity we can to get this program reauthorized is what we should be pursuing. Unfortunately, the third strategy that we were hoping for was a short-term reauthorization to be included in the continuing resolution that must be passed by March 14th. And if you saw the text come out on Saturday, unfortunately, despite receiving some positive signs from leadership in Congress, that was not included in the text. Which is really concerning and something that we really did want to see happen. So we're pushing. I think the most important thing to express now to members of Congress is urgency. These are decisions that are on hold, may not be made, and time is really critical for our rare disease community, for kids. We can't hold off another several months just because it's more convenient. So we are pushing on all avenues, along with many of you, showing the impact, bringing the stories. We have received questions around those decisions that are on hold. So I would just encourage those of you on the call that are familiar with those examples to reach out to your members of Congress, to reach out to us, to help quantify those stories and bring them to life for members of Congress so they can see what the inaction is causing and what that means to our rare disease community.
Thank you so much. And you already alluded to it, but what can groups that are on the call right now, what can they do if they want to get engaged? In addition to reaching out to their elected official, but what tangible advice do you have?
Well, one would be, show your support, right? And make sure that those that you are connected with and have relationships with in Congress understand that your organization, that your community needs this and wants to see it happen. Remind them that it's, long been a bipartisan issue, that it doesn't cost the government money, that time is critical, and that we need to get this done over and get over the finish line. But then also to think about what those impacts are in your community and trying to document them, to speak to those, researchers in your community that might be having these conversations, that might be losing out or being put on hold because the PRV hasn't been reauthorized. Try to capture those examples and feel free to reach out to us. I know Tori's working on the issue as well, but we both, all of us want to see this happen, and we need to bring those examples, make it real for members of Congress, for leadership, and why action is so critical.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned the importance of researchers. And David, you had mentioned that you have played a role in getting the idea passed into law and then the law reauthorized. From where you stand, any thoughts, any advice? Based on your experience, what would you advise people on the call to do? What would be?
Well, I think you're doing great work. And Jamie, that was an awesome summary. Thank you. It is a shame that many of these champions I mentioned earlier have retired or have left the Senate. But as you've said already, it's free, as the Congressional Budget Office said, and it helps sick kids. And so this is just a natural thing to get done. So I do genuinely believe they'll get around to this eventually. But I'm sorry this is taking some time to find new champions. I'm grateful that at the event we did last week, Senator Klobuchar spoke so fondly of it. But I just want to say I'm grateful for the great work that's being done on the ground.
And Ron, I saw you had your hand up, and I know I'm sure you have thoughts and advice too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other key point, along with the fact that this is $0 from the American taxpayer, as David just reiterated. It's also true that in the initial stages of the program, there was some reticence at the part of the FDA because they didn't think they would have the resources they would need to give priority review to these additional therapeutics. But now they are absolutely enthusiastic supporters, and they are going public and saying this is a very important incentive for pediatric inclusion into our clinical trials much earlier than is the norm. So, no longer should we accept any pushback on that account. The FDA is a strong supporter of this program.
Tom, again, coming from the AMR community and just hearing how much of an impact sepsis has on so many patients, I'm just struck by the similarities that we see with the challenges related to antimicrobial drug development and the long fight that you all have led and your allies on Pasteur. So in the last few minutes, I was wondering if you have any thoughts, if you can briefly talk about kind of the similarities that you see to the economic drug development challenges around AMR, and any advice you have based on your experience.
Yeah, thank you. We need to talk about the human cost and the financial cost, particularly in this environment. And I think it comes back to educating and advocating. We were able to conduct a survey of registered voters late last year about antimicrobial resistance, and not surprisingly, only about half are actually familiar with the term. But once they were aided to understand it, what it meant, it really resonated with folks, and 70%, referred to it then as a major problem that was getting worse. And it was bipartisan. This is very, very even across Dems, Republicans, and independents. Similarly with the Pasteur Act, very low familiarity, about 18%, but then once aided about what it would do, we had 90% support. And again, it was bipartisan, 94, 87, 88. And 73% said their elected officials are responsible for solving AMR, 73%. And again, very, very bipartisan. So this kind of information, I think, can really help equip us when we go speak to elected officials and our advocates go to speak elected officials. These are your constituents who care about this issue or being impacted by this issue, red, blue, or white. And and they want you to do something about it. And I think and working together is obviously so powerful because we share these patients and these folks and their vulnerabilities, and these are real people, and these elected officials report to these real people, and they are those people themselves. 1 in 3 of us will get sepsis in our lifetimes. 1 in 15 of us will die of it. And if you're immunocompromised or suppressed, the probability goes much, much higher. So together we can do something about this, and it can actually save lives and save money at the same time.
And I might go off script here for a second. Kelly, I see you on the call. And I know you've done an amazing job talking about your family and the importance of the PRV program to you. And I know advocacy was a relatively new thing for you. So I was wondering, after this really robust conversation, could you briefly introduce yourself, and then any thoughts and any comments and maybe any advice based on your experience?
Absolutely. Hi, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I'm Kelly Brazo. I run a nonprofit organization called the Cure LGMD2I Foundation. I have a 17-year-old who's living with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. It's a rare and progressive form of muscular dystrophy that still does not have an approved therapy, but thankfully, we do have 3 clinical trials in development. One of them is in phase 3. So we're very excited about that. And all 3 of those, trials have received a PRV, orphan drug designation. So we're excited about that, but also fearful at the same time of continued progress in the space. And one thing I just wanted to point out is just last week, I was on the Hill for Rare Disease Day with many of you. And I'm still learning and growing in the advocacy space. But one comment I have to say is I am from Pennsylvania, and Senator Casey was my senator, who was a champion, and it was very heartbreaking to see him not be able to return to office. And in all transparency, going into his replacement's office, Senator McCormick, I went in kind of with a bad attitude, thinking, oh, he's not even going to want to listen. This isn't going to be a priority for him. And there was a huge group of us. It was a constituent coffee talk, so there was probably 100 people in a room that fit 50. But the rare disease champions in the room pounced as fast as we could to get even a second in with him. And he stood and he listened and he heard our stories. And we all just said, let's talk about one thing, have one priority, and it's the PRV. And he was very receptive. And so, yeah, if it makes sense, he said, who wouldn't want to support, rare disease and children? And he actually got up and said something in front of the whole group later. He said, I heard from some of you in the rare disease space. I want to work with you and do the right thing and support children, and if it makes sense. So it sort of turned my attitude around and thought, if we go in and we tell our story, people do get into public service for the most part to have a heart and to listen and to really go in more optimistically moving forward, that if you tell your story, you can make an impact and make a difference. So we can't give up in the face of adversity that we're all seeing right now, and really try to stay hopeful and positive. So
We have about 2 minutes left, and I'm not sure that we can top that. It's so nice to have hope, that this important program will be reauthorized, that incentives for drug development are going to be maintained. And Bridget, I saw in the chat that you are talking about some of the exciting things that are coming down the pike in the last minute or so. Do you briefly want to talk for the group about what the PRV program is meaning for your community?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I was tagging on to other comments, but yeah, we now do have 2 drugs approved in NF, and they've both benefited from this program. And similar to what I stated before, this now only sets precedent that more companies are recognizing, by having now a marketed agent, that there is a market for these drugs. So that incentivizes them to develop when you're sitting at their table, and then also that they see the benefit of including pediatrics. The most recent was an adult and pediatric, as Ron spoke to, and they were able to benefit from the voucher. And then the first was only a pediatric trial. But it is helping companies to continue their great R&D work. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I know we're out of time, but Tori, I know Nord has some action alerts up and other ways to get engaged. If you want to put them in the chat, and if you, for 30 seconds, want to give like a brief summary of like what are some other ways for patients to really get engaged. And then I promise we will end more or less on time, but this was a really rich discussion.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. You read my mind. I just plugged in quickly the link to our action alerts we have on our page. So encourage folks to use those, reach out to your members of Congress. We have a number of actions items up on the website for you to, engage through, including joining our Rare Action Network, but also urging Congress to really get those life-saving rare disease legislation, not just the PRV program, but all of those bills that were in that important bipartisan package that Jamie mentioned earlier, just a nod to Ron's comment about it, not just getting the treatment out there. Access is also really critical. There are some other important priorities of NORDS, and I know the rare disease communities in that larger bill package. So encourage you to take action on that as well. Really having a robust ecosystem of incentives and supports for patients to get access to effective treatments is really vital. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Fantastic. So we clearly ran out of time. We definitely have a lot more to discuss, but what a fascinating conversation. And I think it leaves me really hopeful for the future, but it also reinforces just how important it is for all of us as constituents to have our voices heard and to ensure that strongly bipartisan programs that obviously work and that have a history of working, that they will be authorized and that they can do the work that they do in order to create incentives where market incentives don't exist. Thank you all so much for being here for our March Coffee Chat. And we'll be following up with the summary of the links that were shared just so everybody has them. And just thank you all so much. And thank you so much to the panelists. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you
Thank
so much for
you.
getting us together, Karen. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.